Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Convoy? Well, it's by the originally titled Convoy games and published by Indietopia. And it is inspired by Mad Max and FTL. Those are the words that come from the Kickstarter page. It was a successful Kickstarter, raising about 22,000 euros, I believe. And now this is the complete product. So what's it all about? Well, you will drive around a wasteland. Your ship has crashed. You are attempting to find the parts you need to get the ship back into orbit. Notice this is reference heavy. 0451, that's a Deus Ex reference, that is. There's all sorts of references in this game, some of which are somewhat more on the nose than others. Anyway, you drive around in a convoy, you have a main HQ vehicle. Once that dies, it's game over, and you have escort vehicles, which are equipped with weapons, and you will come across various random encounters. You will try to manage fuel, you'll try and manage your resources, and collect the parts that you need to fix your ship. Let's jump into the game and show you exactly what's going on with it. I mean, I might as well show you the options menu, because that's it right there. Not much. Again, it's very much like FTL, so it's the pixel graphics. It's a little bit annoying that you don't have proper resolution options. I do find that irritating. It's like windowed, border, or stretch. That's like, well, so basically it makes the game either, I think, 720p or the size of your screen, which, if I recall correctly, is a similar problem that FTL had. And you got VSync, you can also change some of these things around a little bit, but that's really about it. And that crashed the game, interestingly enough. Okay, I've actually never seen that before, so let's restart. Alright, that's quite enough of that, thank you very much. Let's jump into the game and show you exactly what's going on with it. Alright. So this right here is the convoy display. This is going to show you the main vehicle in the middle, which can be equipped with a bunch of activatable items. So it doesn't have traditional weapons that just continue firing. It's got a bunch of stuff that you have to activate. They're like spells. So I've got a super heavy laser here, I have an EMP blaster, I have a shield, and I have a mine launcher. These are all collectible. You start with the EMP blaster, and that's all you get. You also have armor and hit points. And once all of that's gone down, well, you're kind of dead. So armor's something of a... I'd say it's kind of a replacement for shields in FTL, but that's not really true, because you also have shields in this as well. So there are some weapons which are good at piercing armor, there are some weapons which are good at piercing hull, and there are some weapons that are good at piercing shields. So you can have all three, but if you want to equip a shield, it takes up space on your vehicle, and each of these vehicles has a different amount of space. And you can go up to 4 escort vehicles of varying sizes, and you can either buy these at camps or you can collect them randomly and sometimes salvage them. So let's open the map. So this is where the main game actually takes place. This is, if we're going to do FTL comparisons, and we should, and the reason we should do that is because the game compares itself to FTL quite heavily. This is basically the sector space that you're traveling through. But this time around, instead of having the idea that you can click on a node, go there, have an encounter, then click on another node, and so on and so forth, this game actually has an open world of sorts. I mean, the open world really consists of a grid, as you can probably see right here. My apologies. And you will note that there is the spaceship on it, and there are also quest points, the side objectives and main objectives. It'll tell you how far they are and kind of what direction they are, so you have to travel in that direction. And there are also camps, so I can head to a camp here, and that will actually let me mess around with the equipment that my vehicles have on, as well as repair them if I need to. This is also the place where you upgrade your vehicles with one of 5 different stats, which are all sort of limited based on the kind of vehicle that you've got. So right here we have this equipped with a heavy railgun and a heavy plasma blaster. It also has a ballistic computer and a shield Mark III. And if we go and check out the other one, it's a smaller vehicle. It's got a minigun and it has a shield on it. I also have some weapons here. You can carry up to 4 spare items at any given time. And these can consist of stuff for your truck, utility items, and weapons, which you will find in red. And this is the truck, and I have 4 utility items equipped: a shield, a super heavy laser, an EMP blaster, and the mine layer. And of course, you can also upgrade your main truck as well, if you so desire. You will notice that there are limits as to how much you can upgrade, and they're all indicated based on the number of these little blips which are filled in and which aren't. So some vehicles can go higher than others on certain stats. Some vehicles are naturally faster than others, so you can upgrade the handling more. Some vehicles are better armored, and so on and so forth. Now, at camps, you'll also randomly have shops, which will sometimes contain items or vehicles that you can buy. Although, what I've noticed is the game doesn't really seem to have a huge selection of them. And indeed, the weapons in and of themselves are not exactly as interesting as FTL, and we'll get onto mechanical discussion in a moment. I want to try and get us into a fight here, because that's what the main meat of the game is. We're going to head in this direction, because apparently the hyperdrive stabilizers are over here. So this is one of the main quests that I'm trying to complete here in order to gather the parts I need for my ship. So I've got a couple of choices here to make. I can head into the town. There we go. You drive up the main road of Whiteborough. Most of the buildings have been shot to hell, corpses litter the street, and the air smells putrid. And he scowls and mutters, "Damn bastards, they deserve to pay for this." We'll look for survivors. There we go. Find a heavily wounded man. Apparently they went east, so we're going to go chase them down. That's a... yeah, I guess that would be east if it was rotated that way. This looks like north to me, but hey, never mind. Never was much of a cartographer. Attack! All right. So you get to battle against a faction here. Now, if I hit pause, you get this active pause, which is, again, exactly the same as FTL. You're probably going to need this, and that's a bunch of vehicles that are coming in our general direction. So if I click one of my vehicles here, it will show me the attack range, and I can focus on a particular target. So this guy with the plasma and the railgun one, probably want to focus on that guy with that. Now, what I can also now do is I can do things like deploy mines, so I'm going to throw a mine there. I can deploy my super laser. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to actually move my car out of the way of this because friendly fire is an option here. And then we can engage in the combat, which is all kind of done on the move, which is an interesting way of doing things. So something, of course, that you didn't really see in FTL, where you were up against one stationary target at any given time. That's, if anything, kind of one of the biggest improvements that I've seen over FTL, the fact that you can actually fight more than one target. It makes things a lot more interesting, and it also makes the combat feel a lot more mobile, a lot more dynamic, because you're constantly on the move. And you might think, well, does the movement actually matter? Well, yes. Note this red skull over here. There's a reason why this red skull is there, and the red skull is there because there is an obstacle coming up, and you can actually ram people into those obstacles, or ram yourself into them if you're not careful. And that will actually result in the instant destruction of your escort vehicles. So you have to watch out for that. I actually had some real problems with that earlier on in the game. When I didn't really realize what was going on, I was able to unfortunately ram my escort vehicles directly into a wall, which completely destroys the escort vehicle. And if you lose your escort vehicles, you basically lose the game. So it's a bit of a problem. But ramming is, of course, a pretty valid tactic. You can ram your opponents into stuff. You can, of course, do damage that way as well. Your main truck will never hit an object like that. That's just not going to happen. But you're going to want to constantly maneuver your buggies and your escort vehicles back and forth in order to actually do the job, and we should be able to deal with these guys no problem whatsoever. Should be able to smash them up. And as I said, you can have up to 4, so the combat is, at least on first impression, quite dynamic. You're moving around a lot, you're dealing with a bunch of different things, you gotta put EMP on the guys with the shields, you gotta use the right weapons on the right targets. The problem is that after you've sort of mastered the combat, there really isn't a great deal to do other than pause, retarget, fight, watch something explode, pause, retarget. There's not a lot of strategy involved in it, and the amount of, say, micromanagement that is required in a game like FTL really isn't here. Yes, you have to pause, and it's nice that you move around multiple escort vehicles. In fact, if it didn't have multiple escort vehicles, I think the combat would really be quite dull. And thematically, the combat's fantastic. It really gives you that Mad Max feel. You're a road warrior. You're rolling along in these post-apocalyptic vehicles on another planet. You're ramming people into walls. You're avoiding mines. You're fighting with vehicle-based weaponry. And I am a sucker for that sort of thing. And I can tell you exactly why that is. Because I played a game a long time ago when I was quite young called Car Wars by Steve Jackson. And that game inspired me to absolutely love the notion of vehicular combat. I love it in games. I loved Interstate 76, Vigilante 8. Yeah, it's a great concept. Unfortunately, there aren't that many games that really do it all that much, which certainly kind of sucks. I definitely prefer there to be more. And thematically, it feels great. You know, I love the ramming in particular. That's a nice little feature. I risk doing damage to my own vehicles to potentially ram someone out of the way. It can also force them to reposition, which can be very important because line of sight is a factor in the combat as well. So when you have a full arsenal for vehicles with different weapons, it can get a little bit interesting. But the tactical element that is in a game like, say, FTL really isn't there. Like, you don't have power management, for instance. This actually comes onto one of my main problems with the upgrade and progression system. You don't have things like power management, and in a game like FTL, there are often a lot of choices to be made in terms of the weapons that you use. and you can choose a weapon that requires you to power down various systems because it requires too much power to run, but it's a very powerful weapon. You've got to make choices. You've got to make sacrifices sometimes. This game has a very linear kind of weapon progression. Like, I noticed with the rocket launchers, there's a light, medium, and heavy rocket launcher. Now, you might think, oh, well, you know, is there a disadvantage to using the heavy one? No, it's literally flat out statistically better in every way, at least according to the stats that the game provides. So unless the game is telling porkies in that regard, the thing itself is exactly the same, only better than the other versions of the weapon. Whereas in something like FTL, you're dealing with the idea that, oh, I can get a big pulse laser, but it's going to cost me so much energy to use, and I've got to level up my ship in order to manage that. Maybe I've got to level up a crew member as well, and I've got to micromanage that crew member and make sure that my crew are in the right places because they'll give me a bonus in certain ways. None of that's really here with the combat, and I think that that was a very satisfying part of FTL. And unfortunately, in an effort to make the combat more mobile, more dynamic, and more action-orientated, they simultaneously sort of threw away a lot of what made the combat interesting. Now, I keep comparing it to FTL again because the game itself compares itself to FTL. You know, that was actually part of the main pitch. So bringing up FTL is, I think, kind of relevant. But even if FTL didn't exist, I'd probably still say the same thing about the combat and the way that the vehicles actually progress. It's kind of similar to the way that FTL had a problem initially with maybe not having enough items, and then eventually they patched stuff in. There were mods, there was, of course, the Advanced Captains Edition, all sorts of things like that. This game has a lack of interesting weapons to pick from, and each of the weapons seems to have a light, medium, and heavy variety, and all of them are just better the heavier they are. Like, there's no trade-off whatsoever. There's no vehicles that can't equip a heavy weapon, that can just equip light weapons and maybe have an advantage somewhere else. So, overall vehicle customization is not as interesting as perhaps it could have been, which I think is a little bit disappointing there. And I would have said that even if FTL didn't exist, because I think a lot of what makes a roguelite title is the progression. It's about leveling up a character, it's about getting items, and each playthrough being different as a result. But I've done a couple of playthroughs of this, but plenty of which, of course, failed. And unfortunately, I've run into the same kind of problem. I keep getting the same weapon drops. I keep getting the same items. There really just isn't a lot there. Now, when it comes to driving around the world, yes, you get these random encounters, but I've had a bunch of repeated encounters already, and I haven't even been playing the game for that long. So it seems like the game maybe just doesn't quite have enough going for it in terms of variety when it comes to events and encounters. And I think a game lives or dies based on the amount of variety that it happens to have. It's particularly this genre. Like, it's got to support multiple playthroughs, because, of course, you die, you restart, the permadeath's a big aspect, and so on and so forth. Sounds great and all, but I'm going to camps where I'm finding only one item for sale. I'm looking for new vehicles. I'm not able to find them. I mean, I lost 2 vehicles recently, and I haven't been able to replace them. I haven't found any camp which has had one, so I'm really just waiting for a random event where I'm able to scavenge one. And yeah, there's plenty of randomness in games like FTL as well, but I feel like at least in FTL I've got a little bit more control of my own destiny. Sure, I can get screwed over sometimes, but a lot of it comes down to my own individual skill, and I don't necessarily think that there's enough of that in a game like Convoy. And that's kind of a shame, because I love the theme. I also gotta say that the open world is kind of uninspired. Like, it doesn't really add anything, per se. It takes away the immediacy of what something like FTL has. Because FTL, you know that you've only got a finite number of nodes that you can jump to, and you've got to build up your ship before you reach the final encounter. In this game, you can just drive around forever, assuming that you've got enough fuel, and you can discover side quests. Now, for some people, that might actually be a good thing, because maybe they didn't like the stress of FTL. They like just being able to fly around an open universe for as long as they like. And of course, there is a mod which allows you to do that with FTL. And if you are that sort of person, then you'll probably find a little bit more appeal in Convoy than I did. But I liked the fact that you were on the clock when it came to FTL. And I like the fact that you were traveling around these different universes, and there was different territories, which would generate different encounters. Now, this game kind of has that as well. There are 3 factions, the Raiders, the Torvak, and the Privateers. So you will get different encounters, either randomly or because you drove up to them. There we go. Let's have a look at that. That's a shame. Because you happen to drive up to them on the map. So if we go here, this is just an encounter, this is a signal, and that's a mission up there. So we can... let's maybe try to contact them. I am the very model of a modern Major General. Indeed. Okay. I guess we'll accept that. There we go. We were able to confuse them, and now we'll move on to the next part of the mission here. And that actually gives me the hyperdrive stabilizer, and then I can kind of drive that back if I so desire. But I'd like to drive around and just try and find some more vehicles. But again, I'm seeing the same events after really a few hours of play, and unfortunately, the desire that I have to replay FTL isn't necessarily here. Now, there is replayability involved in the game. You unlock different main vehicles and different escorts, so you start with different stuff. But the main problem is that the items that you get in the game are fairly limited, so you're not dealing with the same sort of completely different game experience that you would find in something like FTL. I'm probably driving you insane by mentioning FTL as much as I am, but, I mean, what else are you supposed to compare it to? The game itself compared itself to FTL, so I think it's totally fair to actually mention that. I need to be a little bit careful with that laser. There we go, I'm just dodging out of the way of the rockets. With FTL, when you unlocked a new ship, it was often a completely different game experience, because it would be a ship, like, without shields, that relied entirely on a cloaking device, and so on and so forth. But the problem is, all of that cool micromanagement that was in FTL isn't in Convoy, so it's really limited as to the kind of vehicles that you can potentially have, and the kind of items that you can have, and as a result, the kind of game experience that you can have. It's a bit of a shame, because I think people play a lot of FTL because it does have that degree of variety, especially when it comes to the progression. But I don't think Convoy has that, and I think it's Convoy's biggest weakness. Now, that's nothing that can't be fixed in an update, as far as I'm concerned. I really think that is the sort of thing that could be very easily sorted out with content updates and modding. But as it stands, I think the base version of Convoy, you're probably going to have fun for your first few play sessions, but you are going to run into content fatigue quite quickly, simply due to the lack of overall variety in every possible respect that it has in comparison to other roguelite titles. That's the main problem I've got with it. Doesn't mean it's a bad game. It's actually a really good basis for a game. I still love the combat, and again, it's mostly because of my bias towards vehicular combat, but the idea of controlling multiple vehicles and everything being constantly in motion and having to dodge incoming obstacles is pretty damn cool. And it makes up to some degree for the lack of micromanagement that we find in the combat there, and the lack of skill that's really involved in actually playing with that combat. And on harder difficulty levels, it certainly takes a lot more work. It's definitely hard, you know, to the point where I had to switch it onto easy to make sure that I could really get through the content, because I really wanted to take a look at the game. And I played it on medium, and it can be pretty damn punishing at times, no doubt about that. Although, what I've noticed is there's very little getting out of a situation by the skin of your teeth in this game. Either your escort vehicles get overwhelmed and you just die, or you completely obliterate the enemy. There doesn't really appear to be any sort of middle ground. Whereas in FTL, yeah, getting out by the skin of your teeth with half your ship on fire was kind of half the fun, and that's where a lot of the drama came from in that game. And there was all sorts of other bits of complexity like boarding, power management, taking out individual subsystems. None of that's really to be found here. And it's kind of unfortunate. I was hoping for some sort of more in-depth faction-based metagame with all of these different grids. Maybe you could take territory and so on and so forth, but that doesn't really seem to be the case. You can do a bunch of side quests and you can gamble, and yeah, there's definitely stuff for it, no doubt. There's things to do in the world, but they unfortunately all seem to kind of boil down to about the same thing, and a game like this is so hyper-reliant on its combat that if the combat isn't super interesting to begin with, and something that remains interesting throughout, then, yeah, you're gonna run into some problems. People are going to start to get bored of your game, and I think Convoy suffers from that. So the hope is that they get the chance to update, and they get the chance to just make the game more interesting, add more weapons, add more vehicles, add more encounters, you know. It really is a case of more is better in this regard, and that the lack of content there is actually hurting the game quite badly, which is certainly something of a shame there. It's not bad, frankly. It's a little bit disappointing. I was maybe hoping for another FTL, but maybe I should also accept that FTL was really kind of unique, and the attempts to imitate it so far have not really succeeded. Convoy is definitely the closest yet, but I still think that it doesn't quite capture the soul of what FTL involves. and it doesn't offer the depth of combat experience and the amount of replayable variety that's in a game like FTL. Taken on its own, I think that you will, again, probably get a bit bored of it after a while, after a few hours. I mean, I think I played about 4 hours of it, and I'm already starting to get somewhat bored of it, simply because the game doesn't offer enough variety, and it's not surprising me consistently. It's giving me a lot of the same events. Most of it's just, hey, take a multiple choice, and there might be a fight. And that's really all there is to it. And as I said, this combat right now here, I'm not even doing anything. I'm just waiting for this guy to die. There's no tricks I can pull. There's nothing I can do other than just target and fire. And again, I'm getting this... I've got this item like 5,000 times already. I'm just waiting for a new gun or a new vehicle to drop, and it never does. That's certainly a bit of a shame. Convoy, ladies and gentlemen. It is available on Steam, and it's not exactly that expensive. If you like what you're looking at, and you're willing to pay the price tag, which is $15 or your regional equivalent, you'll certainly, I think, get a few hours of enjoyment out of it. I personally have started to get bored of it, and I think I'm going to wait for some mods or wait for a content update to see whether or not it actually makes the game more interesting. In many ways, it's kind of a swing and a miss when it comes to trying to imitate FTL. It certainly has strong points, as I said, but I just find the game to be somewhat stale and lacking in character, which is a little bit unfortunate, because I love the premise. I mean, the premise is absolutely phenomenal. What a great idea that is, but it's just not quite there, I'm afraid. Yet. It may... Oh, I just won a bunch of stuff. There we go. And as you can see, heavy plasma cannon. There we go. I actually at least got an upgrade there. Look at how much stuff I got here. Well, there you go. It's just not really... It's not quite there yet. It doesn't have enough. It doesn't have enough substance. If I was going to come up with a complaint, it would probably be that. Convoy, ladies and gentlemen. Available on Steam for $15, the original equivalent. My name's been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.